Hi, I'm Terry Moore with The Unified Path. Today we're going to have a special interview with my longtime friend Polly Young-Eisendrath. Polly is a woman I've known for several years. She has been a Buddhist for a long time and also has had a distinguished career as a psychoanalyst. She taught at Bryn Mawr for a while, now has a private practice in Vermont, but Polly has taken her life, her spiritual life, and her practice very seriously and has some 19 books in print about these topics, and I understand she's working on number 20. So today, Polly Young-Eisendrath, I hope you enjoy our conversation. And I'd like to welcome Polly to our podcast on the Unified Path. Welcome, Polly.
Well, Terry, it's great to be here. Just great to be here with my longtime friend.
One of the things I'm eager to speak with you about, I know you have your own podcast called Waking Up is Not Enough, Flourishing in the Human Space. And I wanted to ask you, principally, can you tell me a little bit more about waking up?
So waking up, has many potential, let's say, openings, triggers, situations in which people are able to sense directly the undivided love that surrounds both sides of our experience, the dark side and the light side. And when people sense into that undivided love, which they may get to through meditation, psychedelics, near-death experience, being born again, Shaktipat, once they sense into that kind of love, there is a way that it changes them forever, in the sense that they've had an experience that transcends the ordinary duality of subject and object, the sort of,
right,
I'm in here and the world is out there. So once you've broken through that, it changes the way you look at things. So, we consider waking up to be that sort of experience of, you could call it cosmic love, undivided love.
Yes, and waking up is the kind of thing that is really incomparable to any other thing. And as you say, it is determinative, or as sometimes casually said, once you realize there is no Santa Claus, you can't believe in Santa Claus again. And similarly, once you have seen beyond the distinction of subject and object, one can't go back to that kind of polarity. But in terms of actually waking up, as you know, the proposition of the unified path is that one needs to approach this as a whole person. And that means what we call body, mind, heart, and soul. And I know you will agree with me that all of those elements are important. When I think of your work and all of the things you've written, I think of you as really being focused more in the mind part of that development. And I'm wondering if you could suggest the kinds of readings that you have done or that you would find helpful to those who are new to this process, or where to look for those kinds of inspirations.
So, here we go. The way that you are thinking of mind here has to include the body, because, in traditions, the body is actually in the mind, and the mind is the heart. So in the traditions of Zen, for example, Vipassana, Buddhism, also to some extent, I would say Christianity, the mind and the heart aren't really separated. So the traditions that I would say I follow, which I don't know if you want me to go into, some sort of a bibliography, because it's kind of massive, but in general, the tradition is that it's through our actions, in our interactions with what you could call others, the world, or whatever, that we manifest whatever our enlightenment is. So it's not manifested in the mind. Let's
No.
say the experience of it is something that's recognized through our awareness, which
Yes.
I could say is mental, but
Uh, well, we could talk about that some more. Uh, but clearly, what you say is true. Nevertheless, the world and history and tradition are full of wonderful literature that helps us understand these things, point us in the right direction, and helps us synthesize these things. And it's that kind of literature that I'm hoping you can sort of focus on or point us in the direction.
well, I'll mention just a couple of contemporary books. I mean, there are so many that go back to early Chinese literature, and then later Japanese literature, and then, as we come to Western ideas. But right now, a book by Tenzin Priyadarshi called Running Toward Mystery, and I think the
Hmm.
subtitle is something like Living an Unconventional Life. And then another book is Henry Shukman's Original Love,
Oh,
and
yes.
called The Four Inns on the Path, INNS, like places to stay. And then also Shinzen Young's The Science of Enlightenment. These are all contemporary books. They're written by people from different, sort of cultures. Henry Shukman is English, went to Oxford. Tenzin Priyadarshi is at MIT. He's a physicist, but he's a Tibetan monk. And then Shinzen Young is a scientist and a Vipassana teacher. So these books that I'm mentioning all have within them a sense of path, of something to follow, but also the sense that things happen to us that we don't understand. We can call them mysteries,
Hmm.
or we could say that they're events that transform us. So, in all of in these books, these three books that I've mentioned, and there are other contemporary books that I would say are also very good. But in these three, what I like is that there's a clear sense for what awakening is, and then there's a clear sense for everyday practice or everyday engagement that can allow people to translate that awakening
Hmm.
into relationships, everyday life, how they are going to conduct themselves as a result of having certain kinds of insight. So I don't know. I hope that answers.
Yes, I think that does focus on that question. And those are certainly good references. I just got a copy of Original Love myself, and I'm eager to have a look at it. Several years ago,
Jerry, there's your book also, your
say,
recent book, which I see behind you.
oh,
As
yes?
earlier book, yes. And so, I mean, I'm not leaving your books out. It's just that I thought you'd be speaking about them. So, uh,
Well, thank you, Polly. Uh, a couple of years ago, I wrote an essay about the Vedic direct path and its relation to traditional Orthodox paths. And I examined what we can call for each of them a relationship. And so I'd like to ask you something which is really kind of similar. Psychotherapy and traditional formal Buddhism that you have experienced have seemed to have learned a lot from each other over the last few years. And I wondered if you could sort of elaborate on that a bit.
well, again, this is a vast question, so I'll try to do a shortish answer to it.
Yeah, yes.
So, if we think of psychotherapy as an investigation or an inquiry, right? Because we're
Hmm.
inquiring into human experience. It's a two-person, typically a two-person relationship. I mean, you can do it family therapy, but typically it's a dyad, two people, who are meeting generally regularly, and they're inquiring typically into the experience of the one person. that is the client, the person who's coming for help. Now, that is a certain kind of inquiry that requires an ability to go back and forth into each other's experience. Typical situation in Buddhism is that either one is solitary, like in a meditation, you're having your own solo experience and you may be doing it alone, or one is in a group getting instruction, maybe shoulder to shoulder with others, but not eye to eye. So the relationships typically are very different. One of them is dyad, and the inquiry is actually going on between the two people in the present moment, and the other one is more solo or group oriented. Over time, I think these two, let's say, approaches to understanding human suffering and getting a relief from human suffering, they have begun to learn from each other in the last 50 years, since Buddhism has been practiced really quite a lot in the West and in America. Before that, it was not influenced by psychotherapy, even though psychotherapy has been around roughly for 100 years. So, this new development has raised questions about how much of a relational or, let's say dyadic or eye to eye kind of effect does a solitary meditation have? Do we leave the cushion and then, kind of relate through our insights, but without having learned more about how to handle our anger when we get upset with a spouse? And those are good questions. They haven't altogether been answered.
Yes, and these are very much unified path questions because they deal with all of these aspects of ourselves that need to be brought to the table as we grow and explore these things. Now, in that connection, I'd kind of like to ask your opinion about, well, we've talked about what's happened over the last 50 years, but for those who are new, for Gen Z, and for that matter, Gen Alpha, people who are new to this, what would you suggest as initial references or starting points or ways to begin this kind of exploration or journey?
In this digital age, people can go to apps. I wouldn't have said this 5 years ago even, but now there are a number of apps, there are a number of online approaches to meditation that are practice oriented. One of them is Headspace. I don't love Headspace as much as I used to. Sam Harris has one called Waking Up. Also, Henry Shukman has one called The Way. All of these apps, some of which are free and maybe are free for a time, get people going on a practice. Just sometimes short periods of time to practice at the beginning, not more than 5 minutes, because they're training their awareness. And most human awareness is untrained and jumps around, and it's kind of painful to train it for more than 5 minutes at the beginning. So start there, see how it goes. If it grabs, if it grabs you, and if you see what it is after, then I think go for something that's an in-person. Go for an in-person training, look online, look up, your favorite podcasters, teachers, whatever. Most people have in-person, some do online in-person. I personally think it's great to be in the room because there are many aspects of, the way we smell, the way we feel, the way we move together that are not present when we're online. But do something with an actual spiritual teacher. After that, then I think take some time, see how that integrates, and eventually, this is my view, commit yourself to a path. Don't just jump around for 50 years seeking the, what might be a better way. It's kind of like, committing yourself to a person in a relationship might not be, the absolute image of what you imagine to be the best person, but when you commit, then you actually learn about that person.
Polly, when you say commit yourself to a path, what's your definition of path here?
Path for me is a set of guidelines that, let's say, accumulate. There's like a first step, a second step. And so that if you're 10 steps into it, you're actually doing a different practice than you were at step one. Not to say that step one couldn't be your practice. For example, focusing on the breath as a practice of concentration and equanimity. You could do that all of your life and never take on any other path. And that might be okay. But in general, I consider the path to be a set of guidelines. You start with this, then you move to that, and then that. And that there is sort of a, here we would say evidence-based in America, but it's more like a proven way that others have followed. So you can look ahead of yourself and see someone who's already followed the things that you aspire to following. And then, as things develop, you're really looking at somebody ahead of you who's become more or less an expert on these practices. And that's really helpful to have that.
Yes, and this is really one of the founding principles of the unified path, is that if we look back at the saints and sages of history, or for that matter, look around at those who we consider, shall we say, enlightened, more often than not, they have followed a path that involves whole practice, not simply doctrinal, but as you say, involves the body too. Because, as one said, we live here in the body, and all of our parts need to be in sync with this, otherwise we'll not get as much out of it or work as efficiently as possible. And you make the point very well about a path. And I'm just curious what you think about the traditional paths. And by that I mean formal Buddhism or any of the religions that we know.
Well, I'm not an expert on religions. I only know really what I've explored. And the path that I've explored most is, well, there are really two within Buddhist practice. One is called Zen, or Chan in Chinese, and it's a path of sitting meditation. It comes from the Sanskrit word dhyana, which becomes Chan, dhyana, Chan, Zen, Tian. So it's focused on sitting meditation. However, to say that, think of it as exclusive, would be wrong, because it's really an embodiment. So there's walking meditation, sitting meditation, plus ceremonies, plus the ways that one moves around, breathes, bows, and so on. All of that's within Zen. And then Vipassana, which literally means seeing things as they are, is a path from the earlier form of Buddhism, the Theravadan form, that has been passed down through Southeast Asia and then into America. And that path involves more practicing within the sense gates, like hearing, seeing, feeling. So, visual and also, so let's say, I'll just say it the way that I've learned it and the way I teach it: seeing in, seeing out, hearing in, hearing out, feeling in, feeling out. So seeing in mental pictures, seeing out, seeing in the world, hearing in, hearing yourself talk, or hearing yourself, chant to yourself or play music to yourself, and then hearing out, hearing into the world. Feeling in is feeling your emotional life. Feeling out is to feel your embodiment. So this is a way of breaking down, sensory experience. So in Vipassana, you basically learn to cover these domains almost like paint by number, like one by one, until you're able to cover them all simultaneously. So these two approaches, Zen and Vipassana, are different, but they both work with embodiment and also, mental image and mental talk, and movement, the way we move. They both have walking meditation, and both of them have consultation with teachers. However, Zen is a much more intensive relationship with the teacher. Vipassana is more like a coach. You can be coached by a teacher. So, yeah, that's pretty much
Well, I,
it.
I think I think those are very good examples of paths and what they have to offer and how they vary depending on their nature and consequently the needs of the individual who might approach them with different needs. But what I like about what you've said about these paths is that they do all involve the body, mind, heart, and soul. They are full approaches to this. So now, just let me ask, what are you working on now that will be of help?
Well, I've started a nonprofit center. It's called the Center for Real Dialogue, and it's about really taking responsibility for speaking and listening, to be able to do our speaking and listening in a way that leads to healthy conflict and not destructive conflict, that allows us to get to know what others are feeling and thinking, others particularly that we disagree with, or even the people that we're close to when we get into a tangle or conflict, to be able to use, let's say, the skills of speaking and listening to integrate this undivided love that we encounter in awakening. Because many people cannot bring that undivided love
Mm-hmm.
to their ordinary relationships at work and at home. And so the Center for Real Dialogue is teaching skills and methods as well as insight into human awareness, to enhance healthy conflict, which is create and actually extends love.
So what this offers is not only practical, but also more whole and integrating in terms of one's life as a whole.
I hope so. I hope so. I do find being human, it's difficult to deal with the human emotions when we're in conflict. And consequently, humans have repeatedly gone to war. And Homo sapiens, almost their entire history, well, how do I want to say it? 96% of human societies have been at war almost constantly through their history. So, and we are at war now. So, it's hard for humans to actually work with their own emotions and be able to bring that undivided love when they're in conflict with each other, which seems, in a way odd, because we have self-awareness. We can work with our own awareness and stop doing something mid-sentence, but a lot of times we don't. So, I'm hopeful about what we're doing at the center. I have wonderful people working with me. I also do think we're very well equipped to do what we do, but I also think that in a way, it's a big ask. I'm very aware that it's a big ask to bring like awakening and love into conflict, because that's not where you learn. You don't typically learn these paths when you're in conflict with each other.
No, but that's often where we find ourselves. And if you have a way for leveraging that into a greater understanding or love, I think that would be wonderful.
Well, thank you. And, I use your material and your work very much in what I do, because what I've learned really from your teaching, Terry, is the importance of focusing on, I want to call it like the name of God. I mean, I'm not sure really how to put this, but that there are certain sounds and certain unified sounds that bring people into contact with something that they would not typically be in contact with, that might float through, but they would
Yes.
recognize it.
Yes. Thank you, Polly. Uh, yes, I think that is helpful. And I think more often than not, people have a sense of the transcendent, but not a real way to approach it or state it or deal with it. And that's what's being offered here.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I also think that the unified path, in bringing in these components and recognizing that waking up or enlightenment is, let's say, always a contained or constrained experience. Like even the Buddha, had to go back to being a regular person, having difficulties with his wife, difficulties with his cousin. Uh, he had this supreme enlightenment, and apparently lasted about 6 hours. But then he went back to being a regular guy. I mean, not a regular guy, but a pretty regular guy. And so he had to go back and forth. And he was very aware of the back and forth thing. So I think all of us who practiced spiritual practices have had awakenings. I think we recognize we have to take it back into our embodied life. We need to take it in a direction that leads all beings, not just ourselves, but leads all beings into
Yes.
experiences.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. And I particularly like your emphasis on practice, as I have all too often seen people who sort of get it conceptually, but leave it there. And practice is, of course, essential.
Well, I think in the early time of meditation practices coming to America, because honestly, it was really only in the middle of the 20th century that happened. I mean, there were meditation practices, but they weren't widely available. And since that time, I've noticed that there are many folks that read about these things. They don't do them. They just read about them, and they think they're
Right.
wonderful.
And they think they're wonderful. And then they want to read more of them. But they don't do them. They don't put them into practice and use the heart, soul, and body part of their being, which can contribute to their knowledge, understanding, and growth.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what the Unified Path is about.
Yes, indeed. Polly, thank you so much for your time and your words of wisdom, which I think are important, and I'm very, very glad to be able to share with others.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be with you. I love the work you're doing. I'm very in favor of it, and I really watch it going forward with a lot of pleasure.
Thank you, Polly. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Polly Young-Eisendrath. I'd be interested to know if there's anything you learned or would like to add or reflect on. Please leave those in the comments below. Like us and subscribe. And also, until next time, remember, body, mind, heart, soul, one.